Well, Dr. Jackie Copeland, I'm so happy to be sitting here talking with you. I'm so excited for this interview. How are you doing today?
I am actually always doing well,
I
even
love that.
when I'm not.
I love that. I love that. For those of you watching, we are recording this literally 1 week before the Black Philanthropy Month Summit kickoff event. And I know we are so excited. We cannot wait to just be a part of this amazing movement. How do you feel leading up to everything? This is the 11th year of this or the 10th year of this?
It's the 11th official year
Mm-hmm.
of the named Black Philanthropy Month Summit, but this entire movement was in a kind of incubation period
Mm.
since about 2000.
Wow.
Yeah, and we did three test summits, and that whole experience morphed into what was formerly named Black Philanthropy Month on August 10th, 2011.
Wow. Wow. It is just like a true testament to one, your pioneering spirit, but then also the resiliency that it requires to continue to forge these new pathways and make inroads and provide the necessary resources, for marginalized people groups. So I'm just giving you all the props, all the praise, because I always think about the spirit of Ubuntu, but I feel that way whenever I talk to you. Like I am because you are, because you decided to walk, people like me can continue to move forward, can continue to run. So I feel immensely grateful. So for everyone who's
Well,
watching, oh, go ahead.
I'll just say this was a also a community effort. I mean,
Mm,
definitely there's a catalyst, there's a visionary, there's the person who will do almost anything to make sure it
mm-hmm,
happens, and I'm that person. But
mm-hmm.
we wouldn't be here today except for many people, actually a lot of Black women from 30 countries
Wow.
and allies who made that prehistory and that 2011 kickoff possible, and then
Mm,
all of the new leaders who joined to help keep it going. So I just
mm.
always have to give props to the community, especially Black Philanthropy Month is an act of philanthropy and broad based, diverse community leadership.
I love that. Let's keep talking about that for a second. Tell me about the power of community in terms of your work at large, but as it pertains to Black Philanthropy Month, how have you seen community really fuel this movement?
Well, the genesis of this is really my working in philanthropy in various countries throughout the US, growing up in the Black community, where philanthropy or giving is such an ingrained part of the DNA. Sometimes people don't even have a word for it. I mean,
Mm,
they're colloquialisms like giving back, giving black, help. Don't forget where you came from. You got to pay it
mm-hmm.
forward. And so working in the formal philanthropy field, there was this myth that continues that somehow Afro descendant or Black people are the only group of people in the world who don't give.
Mm,
That somehow we're the supplicants of the world. And at the same time, even back when I dreamed this,
mm,
there was research for at least 20 years at that time, reaffirmed by multiple independent studies, that at least in the US, Black people not only give, we give the absolute highest
come on.
percentage of our income to charity or in philanthropy. And the giving tends to go up significantly in recessions. It's at least an average of $11 billion a year. And that's just for African Americans. And then African immigrants give another 12 billion. So we are talking about a $23 billion philanthropic economy. And that is just in the US. But it's repeated in almost every Black community across the world where there have been studies. So this was, instead of being perpetually frustrated at the myth that we don't give, my decision was, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to bring together the amazing, ingenious philanthropists of all financial means and have a month where we're celebrating, documenting, and advancing our giving. And then more recently, also trying to promote funding equity. It is, economic justice is still the unfinished business of the civil rights movement, the African liberation movements, and the contemporary human rights movement. Depending on the country and the study, our communities only get 1% to 2% of both foundation philanthropy and venture funding. And there can be no economic justice. King's dream cannot be realized until Mandela's dream cannot be realized until there is fair access to capital, to private capital. And that's one of the reasons our theme for this year is fierce urgency of now. I've been in the field now for 40 years. When I started, there was advocacy for funding equity, and here we are again. And so my hope is that in my lifetime, we can see significant movement, because despite the post-George Floyd racial reckoning, as many people call it, there have been great companies who have acknowledged, we have some implicit biases that we inherited. Often it's not even intentional. It's just that there aren't the networks. Sometimes across the world, there's the assumption that Black founded and led efforts are inherently inferior, won't meet the mark. And a lot of the people we work with have those Ivy League degrees, and go toe to toe in terms of qualifications and track record and competency with everyone, but they cannot break sort of that cap on Black access to private capital. So that's what it's all about, is making all of us aware, regardless of background, organization. Women are faring the worst across the board. In fact, if you include white women, women only get about 2% of venture funding, for example, and it's only 0.6% for Black women. So I always say there is no way that we can address the contemporary challenges we're facing if more than half of the world's innovators who could actually save the planet, it could be, it could be an entrepreneur from a little country, a little village somewhere in Africa or in the rural US that comes up with solutions, for example, to climate change. And we just have to give everybody a fair shot.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
I have like already have 8 pages of notes, so thank you. Because everything that
Oh,
you're saying, I'm
sorry
already
about
like,
that.
this is the
Yeah,
lecture of life. Okay, you're giving me the
all right.
lecture of life. I love what you talked about in terms of the idea of access, because my family is, I told you this before, my family is from Sierra Leone, West Africa. And every time we go back home and talk to people and I get to meet young people, you know what I mean? Young people who are just finishing school, young people who are a few years removed, like I am, like they keep talking about all the dreams that they have. They keep talking about all the things that they want to do, but it's like, how do you do it when there's no access to
Right.
funding? How do you do it when the infrastructure doesn't exist? How do you do it when there are so many other barriers to entry? And so I love that even though we know that funding alone doesn't solve all these issues,
No.
funding can be a stepping stone, right? To get to certain things and open up certain doors. And I love that. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. There's this myth that innovation only comes from the US and Europe. But we all know that
Mm-hmm.
necessity is still the mother of invention.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things most exciting to me, and this is sort of the flip side of Black Philanthropy Month. Black Philanthropy Month is supported by the Women Invested to Save Earth Fund. And we try to walk our own talk and find mostly women and people of color innovators across the world with viable environmental tech that
Mm,
is affordable and accessible and is working to address climate change
mm,
in the most low income communities around the world:
mm,
US, Africa, Brazil, Australia, the Caribbean, and India. And I will tell you that there is no lack of solutions.
mm.
And many of them are coming straight out of Africa in the most unexpected places. And this is another conversation, but it's the reason right now there are millions of diverse and women innovators who just need a shot. They don't necessarily have friends and family funding is the
Yeah.
problem, because they're from a poor community or they don't have access. But they simply don't come in the package that most venture funders and even philanthropic funders are expecting. And so part of our message is for Black Philanthropy Month as well is we need to take the blinders off and see the innovators hidden in plain view,
Mm,
not just for funding equity, racial, and gender justice. It's in the best interest of the world. It's like we are leaving out the problem, at least half of the problem solvers. And so that's part of the message of Black Philanthropy Month with, a world that's literally burning.
wow.
How how can we expect that we will have broad-based solutions that create a better future if we simply dismiss innovators because of their gender, color of their skin, national origin? It's actually rather backwards.
Mm,
Does not promote a meritocracy. And that's why I and all of the people that I am privileged to work with in Black Philanthropy Month simply believe in human potential and want to support it. Know it's in the world's best interest, and that also includes Black people and women.
I love that so much. I am consistently in awe of all the things that you do, your philosophy, just for people watching. So, Dr. Jackie Copeland is the founder and CEO of Women Invested to Save the Earth, so the WISE Fund, as you just spoke about, the founder and curator of Black Philanthropy Month. You were recently recognized by Congress as a history maker for her innovative civic contributions and was recently recognized as one of the world's top 100 philanthropy leaders by Philanthropy Unbound. First of all, yes, come on, we're gonna clap about these accolades. But second of all, I'd love to hear a little bit more because you've done so much, you've made such an impact. Was there a moment or a series of moments that kind of opened up your eyes to these various injustices, whether it be in the climate, whether it be through racial equity, that said, okay, this is what I need to do? Or was it more of, hey, I'm gonna meet the fierce urgency of now. I'm gonna meet the moment, and it just so happens that it's coming through Black Philanthropy Month. It just so happens that it's coming through the WISE Fund. Like, tell us a little bit more about your story and how these things kind of came to be.
Well, it's a both and.
Mm,
It's kind of where my story meets the world. I grew up and lived many of the tragedies that I work on today.
mm,
And I was fortunate to be raised in a household that was very humble in terms of financial means, but very wealthy in terms of faith,
mm,
um, and just elders who believed we were born for a purpose. I will say a divine purpose, and that part of life was discovering what that was. And part of my mother's responsibility and my maternal relatives was to model and encourage um, me to dream as wildly and boldly as possible,
mm,
regardless of the economic and other circumstances I was in. And I'm being more vocal about this these days. I don't usually talk about my story because I was raised in that era where it's like, you stand on the shoulders of your ancestors. Check. Completely true. We didn't call it Ubuntu, but we knew
mm,
absolutely and were taught that every accomplishment that we have is a blessing
yes.
and also an extension of our community. So I still believe those things. And my mother's saying was, no matter who hates you, because I don't know, people will have various reasons. It's not just about race, be gender, don't like tall people, don't like people with dark hair, don't like people who were born on your block, whatever it is. Her saying was, always remember you're a child of God and God trumps everything and everybody.
Mm,
And your detractors are children of God too. They just don't know it. And so you treat them well. You walk that talk. And so I say that because we were absolutely poor.
mm,
I'm talking about sometimes not food, having, having to walk to school in the wintertime with holes in shoes, no coats. And but at the same time, we never, ever lost that sense that we could
mm,
be agents of our own future. So my inherent orientation with that upbringing, with parents who grew up in Jim Crow, a grandma whose parents were emancipated slaves in South Carolina, was really, if I saw a hole in the world that needed to be filled, I was given the innate capacity to fill it
mm,
and also the responsibility to make it better with others so that no one, to the extent that I can have impact, will have to suffer what I suffered. And so I say that because it's so core to this day to who I am. So yeah, I said I am sick and tired of hearing people claim that we don't give, that
Mm.
we are beggars, we are supplicants, we are selfish, um, we're takers in the world, but we don't give. And so I said, and I remember at the time, many people, highly placed people in the field of philanthropy said, "Who do you think you are to
Mm.
declare August as Black Philanthropy Month?" And my inner voice, I was saying, "I'm that same person Mom told me I was."
Mm.
Where my nickname as a kid was school teacher. Just a family simple affirmation of my capacity. And at the same time said, never forget where you came from, because there's no you without that history.
Mm.
That's what we made possible. So that's what Black philanthropy is. And it's so funny. People say to me, well, how do you create these things? And sometimes I don't assess it objectively in that way. I really am doing what I was taught I was born to do. And instead of complaining, I do bring light to injustices, but change starts with the belief that you can make it so
Mm.
with others. So that's my drive, that's my passion. It's now part of a formal mission statement. I exist to heal people, society, and the planet, and in the process, myself.
If that wasn't just what I needed to hear and the world needed to hear right then and there, that was a sermon right there. Okay, this is gonna be good for a quote. Change begins with the belief that you can make it so. We at Givebutter are all about the idea of empowering change makers. But what you just said there was so key. You can have all the tools in the world, you can have all the resources in the world, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't have the belief that you
That's
can
right.
make it so, nothing else matters. And I love, 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 love that you just said that, because it's just so, so key. I want to hit on a couple other topics before we leave today. I want to hear about some of the roadblocks that you have had to
Oh,
face in building this. Right. I know. You kind of touched on it a little bit before, but I would love to hear what have been some of the roadblocks you've had to endure in terms of in the process of building this movement.
so I'm at a point with, again, with all the crises in the
Mm.
world, I am speaking my personal lived experience, professional lived experience, truthfully, and funding injustice for women and
Mm.
people is real.
Mm.
I want to honor the sponsors and the donors who have supported this, even when it was in those very early stages. We have engaged more than 19 million people from inception across 60 countries in a very novel movement. As you know, there are very few forums where you can convene the ethnic diversity of the global Black community for a united cause. We don't work that way. We have divisions of city, nation. I call it ethnicity because I don't like the word tribe, because the world says Africa has tribes and everybody else has ethnicity. So
Right.
it's like a little pet peeve for me. However, despite all our absolute documented excellence, funding has been really difficult. And we're just a reflection of what all of the numbers say. I talk about that 1% to 2%. So we really do have a problem here. You can't get more credentialed and merit oriented than all of the leaders that have been a part of our movement and all of the documented outcomes that we have made possible. But funding has been a key barrier, so like most leaders, I have stepped in and filled the gap. I don't usually talk about it because I prefer often to give anonymously. That's been a family ethic as well, because feeling is it's more about the cause than individual prestige. And we're at the point where the movement has grown so much. We need more external support. So that's what came to mind for me initially. Then managing the diversity within Black diversity across ethnicity and nation. I mean, luckily I'm prepared because I actually I have worked in Africa in many countries in many ways, in Asia, in Europe, US, in Brazil to a more limited extent, in Caribbean. And I'm a scholar of our cultural diversity and our diasporas and giving. So I know intuitively how to speak about these issues and how to convene diverse Black people. But there are fault lines. Various ones. Sometimes it's African American versus African immigrant. They're just different communication styles, even when we're talking about English and expectations for how people are publicly acknowledged, especially for a people who are often made invisible, and sometimes their contributions and innovations appropriated. And so, just managing all of those inter-ethnic, inter-cultural dynamics. Sometimes a tendency to compete as opposed to cooperate across the global Black community. And for those who don't know, that's a huge statement. There are 54 countries in Africa. If we count the entire diaspora and Africa, we're talking about at least 1.5, quickly approaching 2 billion people. So there's just a lot of cultural complexity there, and that is a challenge. Going virtual or hybrid, which has been an absolute boon for the movement. It's allowed people who could not normally fly to an event an opportunity to engage. And so every one of these challenges is an opportunity. And so like in Silicon Valley and in tech for about 14 years. And starting in 2020, use the most immersive tech I could find with the help of others to simulate a sense of engaged, mutually supportive community. And I think that's one of the aspects people appreciate most about Black Philanthropy Month. It really does feel like an immersive United Nations of Black giving, where people are learning about philanthropy and venture funding in Africa, in the US, in a way that they don't typically have an opportunity, are meeting people and building more diverse networks and peer support opportunities. And so it's more than a conference. That's why it's called a summit. And it's an approach that I have been using since the early 1990s that I was trained in around it was around how you engage diverse people to define a common cause. We've been using polling since 2011 to define a global Black giving and now funding equity agenda. And then we follow up on helping to implement it all year long with a whole range of programming, especially now. We have 10 funding equity principles that the movement defined in 2020. We developed at Black Philanthropy Month an action agenda to implement those principles that includes a global Black funding equity index, a composite index to help us. It's like the world's report card on economic justice in our communities. And this year, we will be happy to reveal the first ever Global Black Funding Equity Awardee.
Wow.
Really important way to model, what funding equity would look like for, playing social change and economic change is difficult. And many companies say, we know how to make widgets, but we have, changing our culture that may have 100-year lifeline to it, identifying these implicit biases that are like, the air we breathe is hard to identify and root it out. And so this award proves that you can have Black funding equity.
I love that.
And so we're really excited about that.
I love that. I have 2 more questions for you, okay?
Yes.
1, where do you feel as if the movement is going next? And how can people support you now? And not support you, but support the movement right now.
Yes, I understand. Well, there is in the context of inequity, our community is always doing what it can to help itself. Okay, at the same time, we agitate for fairness and change. So there has been a renaissance in Black philanthropic and venture funds, which is very, very exciting to help fill the gap in funding for diverse Black people overall, but also women. And they are legion. I mean, it's starting to be documented. And I'm hopeful that, and that's what the WISE Fund is. That was a motivation for funding it, or for creating it in the first place, is I know that there are people of diverse backgrounds who are sick of the funding gap and want these diverse innovators to be able to take their solutions to market and scale. And so we go to investors and the US public to raise money to fill the gap. And I think that is one of the most exciting developments for several reasons. First, it's a way that larger funders, be they venture or philanthropic, can channel resources to promising organizations, because one of their barriers is not having community access or networks. So the organizations, the companies, the innovators are out there, and these funds can act essentially as intermediaries between the innovators who have solutions, who need and deserve resources, and the larger funders who simply don't have the community reach to find, fund, and uplift these innovators. So I'm very hopeful that the sister and brother organizations of the WISE Fund can help increase the pool. And that benefits everyone because then these companies and philanthropies hire people. It's an economic engine that is the problems of the world can be an economic engine for innovators and their communities, especially as we talk about recovery, health recovery, economic recovery in this COVID era.
Mm-hmm.
You know, COVID has not been just a health crisis. It created an economic crisis for most people. There was a very, very elite group of people who actually made a lot of money and are making a lot of money as a result of this crisis. However, and I still call it a crisis because I want to get this across too. There are new variants of the Omicron and COVID virus that are taking people by surprise and infecting them. And for me, vaccination and getting boosted is an act of philanthropy, an act of love for humanity, because that's what philanthropy is at base. You know, so we're not infecting each other. And so I guess my primary message in terms of where those are two trends I see, the growth in funds. There's this racial reckoning where I think in many companies, even though the conversations are always hard because we've all inherited this false ideology of race and this hierarchy of humanity, pseudo-scientific hierarchy of humanity that emerged in the 17th century, claiming that, you know, people of African descent, i.e. Black people, were the lowest rung on humanity's order, and that your people of European, what we call white descent, I mean, there are books written about this in the period. It was actually defined that white people are superior and almost had a right and responsibility to colonize and enslave because that was helping people. I think there are so many people now, especially next generation people of all races, who say, we're sick of it. This whole race thing has been a total mess. It's not helping anybody. It's creating massive self-destruction and abuse across the planet. And we're going to call it out. We're going to be upstanders. And we're going to do our best to just level the playing field.
I love that.
In any way we can. So the enthusiasm of next generation people, the interracial aspect, even more than the civil rights movement, of the global racial justice movement are so encouraging. I have great hope. I know this is a period of despair for many people, but the innovations that I just mentioned are beacons of light and suggest to me that together we can create the world we want to see.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that. And in that same vein, which brings me to my last question, is what is one thing that people can do right now to get involved in the movement?
Well, they can register for the summit.
Come on, August 3rd. See you there.
Yeah, and that's just a kickoff. There are 5 other events across the world. and everyone can participate. You don't have to be Black. You don't have to be a funder. You don't have to be a grant seeker. You can just be interested in a more just world. There are many practical things one can do in addition to attending the summit. You can fund the summit as an individual or institutional donor. You can also sign if you're representing an institution, philanthropic or investment institution. You can sign the Global Black Funding Equity Pledge. So there are links to all of these action steps or this sort of funding equity toolkit, all consolidated in our registration link for Black Philanthropy Month. And I'm going to share it, but know it's case sensitive. So just search it online and go to bit.ly Fund Black Summit 2022. Or your listeners can go to the Black Philanthropy Month website, which is blackphilanthropymonth.com. We have about 45 communities across the U.S. that have used our proclamation template to organize in their city or in their state to get every August declared as Black Philanthropy Month. That's an important way. From the very beginning, we built this movement and something any individual can do. And when you see injustice against anyone, regardless of race, gender, national origin, language, religion, no religion, what have you, understand that if it can happen to one person, it can happen to you. And because Ubuntu is real. Injustice undermines humanity, whether you are the target of it today or tomorrow. So always use not just your money, but as we say in the Black community, philanthropy is about love of humanity. And we can give time, talent, treasure, voice, ties, mutual support. We have so many resources just because we are alive, despite our economic circumstances. Pay it forward. You don't ever know whether the person you help, the community you help, will help someone else in a virtuous circle that saves the world.
I love that. What a note to end on. Everyone watching this, all of this talk and all the resources that Dr. Copeland mentioned will also be posted on givebutter.com/Black Philanthropy Month. You can check it all out there. You can you can register for the summit. You could support this amazing movement. And I really love what you said towards the end, that you can help just by being alive. So take that. We are all change makers. And Dr. Copeland, I thank you so much for this talk, this time, and everything that you're doing to continue to propel this movement forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you, all your colleagues, and Givebutter, for stepping up and being a partner in a very bold way for Black Philanthropy Month, and actually creating a tool that helps smaller nonprofits sort of manage their overhead well. Fundraising can be very expensive. And so I appreciate the high quality, high impact technology that's affordable that your company provides that makes it easier for everybody to be a philanthropist.